Stretching upwards of 100,000 kilometers or 62,000 miles into space, the International Space Elevator is by far the tallest and largest structure ever built by humanity. Its construction was to advance aerospace technology, rebuild Usea by creating jobs, supply the continent with renewable energy, and take an important part in an upcoming war. Because this is a stranger after all. Like, why would you build all this cool stuff if you're not gonna use them in a war? So in this video, let's talk about the design, history, and geopolitics of the space elevator's construction, why it was the cause of the Lighthouse War, and the possible connections between the ISAF and Belka, because everything in Stranger is connected to Belka somehow. Let's start our endeavor in the late 1990s, when Stranger was hit by the most infamous space boy of all times, the Ulysses asteroid. As you know, the continent of Usea got hit pretty hard, and one of the most affected locations was the city of Salatapura. One of the Ulysses fragments fell into the sea at a distance of 20 kilometers from downtown Salatapura. Though it wasn't a direct hit, the asteroid created a tsunami that hit the city and killed roughly 30,000 people. Salatapura was devastated by the Ulysses in the year of 1999, which is when the Ulysses fell. Salatapura, together with the rest of the Gunter Peninsula, were part of Erusia. This is not consistent with the briefings from Ace Combat 4, but it's what the 2019 edition of the Lighthouse War says, so we'll go with that. After the Ulysses fragments, there's a refugee crisis, followed by Erusia's declaration of war, and ultimately ISAF's victory against Erusia. After Erusia's surrender, several things happened. The ISAF put an interim government, brought back the royal family and put them into power, more on that in this other video that I made. The Erusian military was limited to a small defense force, and 40% of Erusia's territory was lost after a military trial. From this point on, Salatapura and the rest of the Gunter Peninsula were stripped away from Erusia. The Ace of War book mentions that this new state was independent but ran like a puppet for the International Union, which occupied it and the neighboring countries as well, with its peacekeeping forces to form a deterrent against any Erusian rearmament or aggression. Now, it's important to mention that over 50% of the military personnel that occupied the Gunter Peninsula were from Osea, even though Osea had nothing to do with the Usean Continental War, but instead they decided to become the world police and send their military to other continents. In 2011, just after a Circum-Pacific War between Osea and Yuktobania, Osea took part in some serious talks with some Usean nations about rebuilding the continent's infrastructure, because Usea still had not recovered from the Ulysses disaster. The most serious problem for Usea was still the refugee crisis, but just as important, Usea was facing an energy crisis because its infrastructure was also destroyed by the fall of the asteroid. Vincent Harling, the president of Osea at the time, proposed the construction of the space elevator in Usea. Osea would help with the cutting-edge space technology and funding, while the Usean nations would help with the labor and some of the technology. After construction was complete, the Usean nations would enjoy a vast supply of solar energy, a boost to tourism and technological advancement, while Osea would most likely receive the financial return from its investments and be able to further space exploration, including the return of the Pilgrim 1 space mission. More on that on this other video I made. In the year of 2011, the International Space Elevator Corporation, ISAF for short, was created and the work on the space elevator began. This is said to be the largest joint international project since the Ulysses disaster. However, the extent of the contributions of different countries is not mentioned. We only know Osea was the most important country behind the project, but many others were involved in an unspecified manner. The location for the elevator's construction was obviously Salatapura. This city was not only a vital transportation link with a large port and intense maritime traffic, but also had natural characteristics that helped in the construction of the ISAF. First, it was near the equator, and second, it had an undersea Ulysses crater where the elevator and its supporting artificial island could be built with ease. It also goes without saying that the country where Salatapura is located, since we don't know the name of the country, was pretty much a puppet from the International Union, so building stuff there would not be a problem from a military perspective because the IUN already had several military forces stationed there. Or so they thought. Though the ISAF project started in 2011, the actual construction began in 2013 and was expected to last only 70 months, or 5 years and 10 months, which sounds pretty amazing for the largest structure ever built by humanity. I can only believe this kind of short schedule because of Belkan technology, of course. Anyway, the first step towards the ISAF was the launch of a rocket from the Komona Island Space Center in January of that year. A construction ship was assembled in low Earth orbit that kept circling the planet while gaining altitude via a magnetoplasma dynamic thruster. In May, the construction ship reached geostationary orbit, which means it's circling the Earth at the same speed as Earth's rotation, which means it appears to be stationary from the perspective of someone on Earth. At this point, the construction spaceship began to extend a cable in two directions, one towards the Earth and the other towards space, while the craft was still gaining altitude. Only in September of 2013 the cable reached the ground and the Earthport base was established. At the same time, the construction spaceship became the counterweight of the cable at 90,000 kilometers of altitude. By this time, the very basic structure of the elevator was complete, and now it was only a matter of reinforcing the structure because the initial cable used was very weak and could not handle the massive climbers that you see in the finished stage of the ISAF. From here on, engineers started attaching more cables, reinforcing them, and using small climbers. With more reinforced cables, the elevator could accommodate more climbers, which were becoming increasingly heavier and using each other as counterweights. The process repeated itself until 6 large cables had been set up, and at one point there were 24 climbers in operation. At the end of the 5 years of reinforcing, it became possible the usage of climbers weighing 100 tons each. Around this time, the space station in the geosynchronous orbit began test operations together with the passenger climbers. By August of 2018, the space elevator was nearing completion and work progressed at full speed with as many as 1,000 people working each shift in the Earthport. Construction continued non-stop 24 hours per day with 3 different shifts used. Almost all of the labor came from different countries within USIA. Workers coming to Salatapura would get short-term work permits, receive about 2 weeks of VR education, work for 2 months, and then return to their own countries with new knowledge and new skills that could be used to rebuild their home nation. It is said that over 100,000 USIANs have taken part in the construction of the ISAF structure. Meanwhile, most of the technology used came from OSIA, while some key individuals from North Point, Erusia, and OSIA took some top positions. After stepping down from office, former President Harling joined the ISAF efforts, and he was a key individual in articulating with different countries for the cooperation in the project. Other notable people include Site Director Yao from Erusia and ISAF Construction Technology Research Institute Director Dr. Blumen. Although this guy doesn't have his nationality revealed, given his surname and the fact he's involved with some technological shenanigans, I think it's pretty safe to assume it's Belka. So there you go, one more probable use of Belkan technology for the well-being of humanity, because Belka did nothing wrong. However, the construction of the space elevator was filled with controversy. Erusia and the surrounding nations were very frustrated by the hostile actions of the peacekeeping forces and the environmental damage caused by the elevator's construction. Erusia for once saw OSIA as an invasive presence in the Euxine continent, especially due to the fact that OSIA had not been involved in the Euxine Continental War at all, yet was exerting enormous political and military influence in the region, which was just outside Erusia's borders. Moreover, it is possible that Erusia felt unfairly treated and jealous over Salatapura's economic miracle, since the city was part of Erusia until it was taken away by the ISAF. Due to a huge influx of foreign capital and the construction of the space elevator, the city that was once devastated by Ulysses saw its GDP grow by over 500% from 2008 to 2018. Erusia had been protesting over the years but never posed a military threat to OSIA because its military had been limited by the terms of the surrender from the Euxine Continental War. But finally, Erusia said enough was enough and declared a surprise war against OSIA in May of 2019 after rebuilding its military and getting some upgraded drones from their Balkan arms dealers. Officially, Erusia declared war due to OSIA's excessive political and military interference in the Euxine continent, as well as OSIA's monopoly on the allocation of the energy from the International Space Elevator, which, by the way, was not even finished. Unofficially, you can also say that it was because Erusia wanted to annex the claimed Gunter Peninsula and that the radical faction within the Erusian military was overconfident in their new drones, while still agreeing with the official motivations. Now, as you know from Ace Combat 7, Erusia made its blitzkrieg attack, captured the ISAF, and took control of its defensive weapons like the 2 Arsenal birds, but just as important, Erusia took control of a massive source of energy, which is of major importance in economic terms. By the end of the game, the International Space Elevator is still up and pretty much intact, and presumably it stays safe for the upcoming years. However, I do find the existence of the space elevator interesting as we approach the corporate takeover from the 2030s, with General Resource and Neocom, since the two corporations are also engaged in a space race and having control of the space elevator would be a massive advantage. I would even say that if one of the two corporations had the ISAF, that would go against the events of Ace Combat 3, which makes me think that at some point before Ace Combat 3, the ISAF would have to be destroyed because it still represents government power instead of corporate. But that's just my speculation on the events post Ace Combat 7. In terms of design, we'll be focusing on the Earthport structure and its connection with the ISAF space station. This space station is located at 36,000 kilometers high, and at this altitude several solar power generation satellites were to be constructed. These satellites would send the energy back to Earth by shooting microwave beams to receiving antennas located around the entire Eurasian continent. And by the way, both Arsenal birds Liberty and Justice had a dome on top of their fuselage which acted as the receiving antennas for the energy, reason why they could fly literally forever. All in all, the ISAF acted as a large source of reliable, sustainable and eco-friendly energy to the entire continent. Some of the energy, however, did travel through the elevator's 6 cables to power up the 3 large 100-ton climbers. These climbers made the journey between Earth's surface and the space station at an incredible speed of 200 kilometers per hour, or 124 miles per hour, which is quite a feat if you consider how big and heavy they are. But still, the journey from the top to bottom, or vice versa, took roughly 1 week and 12 hours. These climbers not only carried cargo, but they also had plenty of space for passengers who would enjoy a very nice view out of their large windows. Also, considering the length of the trip, you could say that the climbers almost acted as a hotel, and that reminds me a lot of Gundam 00. From the Earth's surface to about 12,000 kilometers of altitude, the space elevator's cables and climbers were protected by a windbreak. Obviously, such protection couldn't go on forever because of the massive weight of the structure, even though it was built with lightweight material, and for gameplay reasons. At the end of the windbreak, there are some lights and sensors to monitor the wind conditions in order to assess where it is safe to climb or not. A malfunction of these sensors would immediately switch the ISAF's power to its backup and cut the energy transmission from the space station to Earth, which is why you see Rosa disabling the sensors on top of the windbreak in order to deactivate the Arsenal Bird's shield. From the top of the windbreak, which can be reached from the ground via maintenance elevator, we have emergency escape decks at intervals of 2 kilometers so that in case of a climber getting stuck, people can jump to safety back to the surface with parachutes, of course. Starting from 1,600 meters from the surface, or roughly 5,250 feet, the ISAF has this large round facility where visitors can go up and see a breathtaking view of Salatapura and the surrounding area. The ISAF's disk is 75 meters high, and assuming a 3-meter distance between floors, this section of the ISAF could theoretically hold 25 floors, which would be probably used by tourists and offices, basically acting like a mini city in the skies. The part of the structure of the ISAF close to the ground consists of the main elevator pillars plus 6 columns that branch out just above the ISAF's disk. This style is very similar to the Exceed 4000 concept building, which was actually to be larger than the space elevator's base and even house up to 1 million people. However, there's no reference to the number of people that the ISAF from Ace Combat 7 could house, and we don't even know if the 6 pillars were only made for supporting the structure or had habitable space inside. As for the base, the ISAF was located over an artificial island. This island wasn't a mega float, but was physically connected and built over the undersea Ulysses crater. The island had several cargo piers, ports of entry, medical facilities, hotels for the tourists, and landing pads where the Eurasians casually leave a V-22 Osprey with its engine running. Totally a coincidence. And for protection, the artificial island was surrounded by a breakwater with small openings so that ships could enter and deliver their cargo to be shipped to space via the elevator. Besides getting to the elevator by ship or helicopter, vehicles could cross a 3-lane highway that connected the elevator's base to downtown Salatapura. Or another way would be by using the underground service tunnel that connected Salatapura's harbor and industrial zone to the elevator's base. This tunnel was mainly used for the delivery of cargo and consisted of a double-lane road that goes both directions and 4 different rail tracks. Between the industrial zone and the elevator's base, there are 4 safe zones. Each of these safe shelters could be sealed with watertight emergency shutters in the case of flooding, and they provide extra room for the parking of vehicles and the storage of containers. At the end of the tunnel, we arrive at the ISF's lowest floor, a geofront, where trains would drop their cargo, which would be stored and loaded into the ISF's climbers via automated gantry crane. This is also the area where presumably passengers would be loaded into the climbers for their 1-week journey towards the top. This concludes my video on the International Space Elevator from Ace Combat 7. If you want to learn more about Ace Combat lore, you can check this playlist right here, and if you're looking for some cool merch, check my Redbubble store, link in the description. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.